Welcome on stage, Mr. Grant Achatz from Chicago, Illinois. Selenia. Hey.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for staying until the end. We like to be the closing team here. This has been my first trip to Germany ever, believe it or not. And we've had some wonderful experiences already at some amazing restaurants, both here in Cologne and Berlin. It's been a very exciting trip, and we'll be sad to go back home to Chicago. Okay, for our first concept, well, let me back up. I think it's important for us at Alinea to recognize that going back now 10 years, we set out to be a very globally influenced restaurant. So, in the opposite of certain pocket movements, say New Nordic, where everything is very local, we wanted the ability to gain inspiration from all over the world, from our experiences, our travels. Of course, we've all been very fortunate to be able to go to different countries and meet different chefs and see these different ingredients and be inspired and bring that back home to Chicago and let that influence our cooking. So recently, about 8 months ago, we were doing a dinner with Danny Garcia in Marbella to honor Ferran Adria. So Andoni and Arsac and all the Spanish chefs were there, and it afforded us a great opportunity to be both in the south of Spain and then ultimately make our way up to the north in San Sebastian. And what we've always found that whenever we do these travels, like I said, not only do we pull ideas back to Chicago, but usually the unexpected happens. And in this particular case, I'm going to show you the start of the Alinea experience right now as we have it. So one of the big things that we did while we were there is Barcelona, Marbella, San Sebastian. We tried to really dig into pinchos and tapas because at our second restaurant next, we were going to devote a whole menu cycle, which ends up being 4 months of the year, to tapas. So we went to Spain and we talked to Andoni and we talked to Albert, and they gave us the very exhaustive but highly delicious down the rabbit hole, if you will, into tapas. This is Albert at Bodega, really going through all of the traditional Spanish tapas. When we got home and started looking at our photographs, there were a couple that stood out, and some of them, all of them, are very classic. Tortilla, gilda, ham sandwiches, patatas bravas, jamon iberico, and melon. But one thing that struck me was looking at the photos on our computers and saying, hey, how can we Alineify? How can we modernize these classics and incorporate them into the Alinea experience? But one thing that was intriguing were the photos themselves. So we started saying, sure, we're going to make modern interpretations of these dishes, but for whatever reason, when I saw the photos on the computer screen, I thought to myself, why don't we use the photos as the description to show the juxtaposition of classic and modern? So maybe if we had a couple willing participants that would come up and have a couple of bites of food? Anyone? Here we go. So at the restaurant, prior to sitting down, there would be a decanter already on the table with herbs that we are typically growing from our roof deck garden. The captain or sommelier would come over and basically deal the cards, if you will. And they're not like that. They randomly go all over the table. Thank you. At this point, the sommelier would come over with some cava and intentionally deflate the aeration or the carbonation in the cava, infusing it with the herbs that are inside. And meanwhile, back in the kitchen, we would be preparing the second component to the cocktail. So in these antique coupes, we have a snow or an ice made from sherry. In this case, an Amontillado sherry, frozen in liquid nitrogen. And then on top of this, we place an spherified peach. So we take Micria, white chocolate, we infuse it with almond. We dip it in the Micria base with a peach liquid on the inside. The guest is then instructed to pick up the peach encapsulation in one bite. Take it, it explodes on the mouth. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Just the peach. One bite. So now we have the cava infused with the herbs, poured over the Amontillado sherry ice, making a cocktail to start the meal. And then directly on the photos that came from our trip, we place the Alinea versions of these classic pinchos or tapas. And the idea being they're obviously highly manipulated. They look nothing like what we were served in San Sebastian. But as I mentioned, the idea that you can look at the traditional and then see a modern riff or interpretation on top of that is what we found rather compelling, because we don't think that if we were to put this in front of you, this very clear gelée of peppers and anchovies with garlic, it would translate. But this way, you have an idea of what the canapes are based on the photo underneath. And at this point, the captain or the food runner, whoever served these set of amuse, would simply walk away from the table. No instruction necessary, because it's all right here visually giving you the description. I'll just run through it with you so you know what the food components are. Our interpretation of a tortilla, classic Spanish tortilla. We have sous vide egg yolks that are cooked for quite some time with a little bit of olive oil at 60 degrees. We have some potatoes that are also cooked in olive oil and garlic, along with onions. And those are on the inside of basically what is an egg yolk sandwich, wrapped with Iberico, some scallion on top. Our interpretation of a bocadillo, which is manchego fat. So we roast the manchego very heavily until it actually leaches out its own oil and fat. We mix that with tapioca maltodextrin to make a powder. We take the jamon Iberico, shave it with a microplaner, and lightly dehydrate it, turning that into a powder that's sprinkled on top, a little bit of tomato powder, and some finely ground toasted baguette. So all that's mixed together to mimic the flavor of a very traditional Spanish sandwich. The clear gelées are run through a rotary evaporator. So you have the traditional Spanish pepper and olives that are used to make up the tapa gilda. And then the inside, in the crater, you have olive oil that's been infused with anchovy. For the melon and ham, you simply have, in this case, a very super ripe Japanese melon that's compressed in its own liquid, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt, a little bit of acid. And then on the very top, you have a thin coat of only the fat cap of the jamon Iberico, a tiny little sprinkle of chili, and then lastly, the patatas bravas. We take the potatoes, turn them into a puree with half and half, set them into a custard with the use of iota carrageenan, and then coat the outside with crispy potatoes that are heavily infused with smoked paprika, Spanish chilies, and salt. So the idea is the guests would then pick up each one of these glass monocles and have the canapé directly off the glass. So feel free. Paper.
Und kann man das essen, Yildiz?
Ausgezeichnet.
The whole idea with this as well, and the connection with showing the Alinea interpretations of a very classic bite, is that it's very unexpected in the way they aesthetically appear compared to the original. And so, again, having that visual information there, allowing you to compare the two and how we've transformed them aesthetically, but yet held true to the flavor. The idea being that if you were to close your eyes and take a bite of that patatas bravas custard, it should, in theory, taste exactly like what you would get in San Sebastian. Okay, can we move to the next slide? Can we go back to the slideshow? There we go. Okay. So we talk a lot about things evolving in gastronomy. Alinea itself is a restaurant that we've always committed to when we opened in 2005. It's something that was in a constant state of evolution. We told ourselves that we weren't going to have signature dishes, that we needed to keep pushing forward in order for us to not become stale. Back in 2002, I had the idea of trying to make food float and blowing up food, essentially. So in my mind, I was kind of trying to figure out what food items have this very elastic quality that we might be able to push air into it, push liquid into it, push gas into it, and have it inflate. This is an example of mozzarella curd. Fresh curd that's soaked in hot water becomes very pliable, very elastic. In this case, in 2002, we filled it with tomato water foam to create a tomato dish. So that was the final presentation. We essentially failed. We won and we lost at the same time. This dish happened to become one of our favorites. It was a very interesting way to manipulate the mozzarella. Aesthetically, it was very intriguing. It looked like a whole piece of burrata or mozzarella. But ultimately, the guests would cut it open and it would just kind of deflate. The tomato water would run out. Now, this was in 2002. And I kept saying to myself, at some point, I really want to be able to make food float. Now, this was filled, like I said, with tomato water foam that was based off of nitrogen. Nitrogen doesn't float in this particular example. So we kind of put the idea away. And nearly 10 years went by. I had moved on, opened a linea. It was still in the back of my mind. How do we make food float? We were having a creative menu meeting one day, myself and the sous chefs, before prep. And I was on my way to Tokyo, again, doing a congress similar to this, but very excited to go to Japan and be inspired. And I said to the chef de cuisine, we really should try to figure out a way to make this float. And he said, Chef, I'll make that happen. And we all kind of giggled because we had been sitting on the idea for 8 years and could never figure out how to do it. So I go to Tokyo. I come back, and I see this. So I'm going to play you another video to illustrate exactly how we make it, and then we're gonna have you taste it.
So we have a green apple balloon where you can just put your lips to the balloon and inhale the helium out of it. The second option, we have a pendant down at the bottom of the apple leather string.
Where are we going to do it? Right here?
Poke it if you like, and then enjoy it. The entire thing is edible.
Oh, say, can you see?
So now we're going to make a couple. The really fun thing for us with this was, well, one, it's food and it floats. That's pretty fun. But the guest reaction when you put something like this down in front of them and they breathe in the helium and they smile and they laugh, and it's, I would say, very unexpected in a Michelin 3-star restaurant to be sucking on helium and having your voice change like that. So it's really kind of changed the culture of the restaurant.
CHEF-SACHE is cool.
All right, and then we'll just crank out a bunch, right? The sugar itself is
Cool.
The sugar itself is a very, actually a pretty simple ratio of xanthan gum.
CHEF-SACHE, das geht von mir.
And the string itself is made from apples that have been sliced on a chiba slicer, cut thin, and dehydrated. So the entire thing is edible. Once you pull the helium out of the balloon, what we tell most people is wrap the string around the taffy and eat it like a candy. The sugar base poses some interesting,
Das ist Wahnsinn.
interesting cooking problems in that it's obviously very sensitive to humidity and temperature. One thing that we found, we did an event for
Es ist
Food and
schön,
Wine
hier zu sein.
magazine, and it was in Aspen, and the elevation was 8,300 feet above sea level. So the entire recipe had to be changed because of the atmospheric pressure. So it's really been, it's been kind of a fun exercise in the organic nature of food and how it really is dependent on the environment that you're serving it in. We'll do a few more.
Comment.
Sehr interessant, sehr interessant.
And then we'll go right into the map. Probably.
Du bist ein Otto.
Okay. We had enough? All right. We can come back to this a bit later, but we'll go on to the next
Das
concept.
ist so
here.
schön hier.
Thank you. Take this and these. Okay. So also right around 2002, when we started collaborating with a designer to make some of the more unique serviceware for the restaurant, going back when I was at Trio before Linea, I was frustrated with the idea that chefs only had the ability to plate food on the predetermined size of the plate. So you could buy a 14-inch rectangle, you can buy a 12-inch round, you can have big bowls, small bowls, plates. Then it became popular to start using other things, more organic materials like rocks and tree bark. But one thing that we wanted to do was expand the scale of our presentation. And it's the same exact thing as when you go to a museum and you see these gigantic canvases that take up entire walls. I wanted to be able to take up the entire tabletop. And when we were talking about it with the designer, the idea was right in front of us, but we could never see it. We kept saying to ourselves, well, how do we make a giant plate that covers the entire table? Well, in fact, it wasn't a giant plate. It was a tablecloth that you could put food on, that could be cleaned, that was sanitary, that was waterproof. So again, that idea kind of was in the back of our mind for years and years and years. And then the designer called me after, I think it was 7 years. He called me one day and he goes, I figured out the giant plate. And I said, excellent, what is it? And he said, it's not a plate. It's going to be a tablecloth, and we're going to make it out of silicone. You'll be able to come out to the table and expand the scale. You'll be able to perform the plating right in front of the guests in the dining room. But you'll also have the ability to control in a way that sometimes we don't as chefs by using plates. Can we go back to the slideshow here real quick? Sorry. So the idea is, in this particular example, we can have components on one far edge that might be out of reach of someone. So let's say we put all of the passion fruit on one end, and somebody has to ask their dining companion. They have to interact. Can you please pass me the passion fruit? So the idea of having control and expanding the scale was something pretty appealing. This was actually, that slide is from 2003. It's just a mismatched Photoshop showing the concept before we even figured out how to do it. But this is how it works. So just as Chef Simon rolled out the silicone, a front of the house team member would come over, put the mise en place down, just as they had here. Myself, one of the other chefs would come up to the table and be able to plate directly on the surface. So we have We have 19 tables at Alinea, and we do anywhere from 90 to 96 covers a night. So that means that myself, the chef de cuisine, the sous chefs come out to the dining room about 40, 42 times a night to do this presentation. At the beginning of the night, it's great, and by the end, I'm like, all right, enough. Okay. So the dark sauce that we put down there was rum and molasses. We're going for, in this particular example, a very tropical theme. So you have dark rum, you have Jamaican allspice, and this is mango. Passion fruit gelée that's put back into the skin. This is watermelon that's been compressed in lime. Some lightly poached dragon fruit. This is kind of an inside joke for us. Some people get it, some people don't. We call this golden pineapple. It's literally a mixture of freeze-dried pineapple, butter that's cooked down. It solidifies, and then we paint it with edible gold. Caramelized banana nougat. Sour cherry. And these are kaffir lime candies in an edible wrapper. Some chocolate. This is lychee snow. And frozen coconut. So I think what's important.
Wunderbar. Da wird das Essen zu einem richtigen Kunstwerk und das wird man als Gast niemals vergessen. Und wie gesagt, es sieht nicht nur schön aus, es ist nicht nur echte, wahre Kunst. Eat Art, es ist tatsächlich auch unglaublich lecker, werden das. Es ist wunderschön. Ich finde, das ist ein geniales Beispiel dafür, wie sich verschiedene Kunststile zusammenwirken. Also hier, das ist Malerei, das ist ein bisschen Jackson Pollock, das ist fantastische Kochkunst und es ist Performance. Alles in einem. Okay.
Good. Can we go back to the show?
Okay. Ja, ihr dürft essen, glaube ich. Ja. Ja, ihr seid ja Teil des Kunstwerks, genau. Und vollendet das jetzt.
Okay, we'll go back to the slideshow here. So those are the three concepts for food, but I wanted to close it out and then open it up to any questions if that's something that we want to do. We talk about the constant evolution. We talk about the idea of styles in gastronomy kind of coming and going. I have a philosophy that every 15 years, right, there's this ebb and flow. I remember when I went to El Bulli for the first time in 1999, it was very apparent that El Bulli and the Fat Duck and some of the other restaurants within Spain and beyond were cooking in a very definitive style. And then came Brunei and Geranium and Amas and everyone in the Scandinavian arc, whether it be Copenhagen, Stockholm, whatever. And then that became very powerful and very influencing in gastronomy. And people say to me all the time, well, what's going to be the next? Is it Peruvian food? You know, everybody's going to Lima. Is that going to take over global gastronomy as the next trend? And I say, well, if I knew what the next thing was, I would be doing it. And I think that one thing for me is it has to kind of happen organically. Let things run their course. But one thing that question kept coming back to me made me think of, well, we can work on dishes. We can work on the arc of a menu, a tasting menu format that goes up and down, sweet, savory. It can have vegetable focus, seafood focus, meat. We can go off the plate right onto the table. We can involve all of this new serviceware. We can continually evolve the experience that way. But what about the container itself? What about the restaurant? Alinea right now at a little over 10, or 10 and a half now, is the busiest it's ever been. We have 24 chefs in the kitchen. Like I said, we're doing between 90 and 96 covers a night. People ask me, what are you going to do with it? And we said, well, we have to reinvent the restaurant. That's the name of the restaurant, Alinea. We constantly have to start over. So we made the decision to shut it down. January, February, March of 2016, we're going to go through a major renovation with the idea of not only giving it a fresh look and a little bit of excitement, but we're going to go back to some of the concepts that we had talked about for years, but we were never able to accomplish. And I firmly believe that we have this 180-degree theory. So pretty much whatever you look at, whether it be art or music or architecture, cooking, any type of design, like I said, you have that 15-year cycle where things become very popular. It's the new idea. That peak runs, and then somebody comes up with a new idea. And then everybody gravitates towards that. And the whole cycle starts over again. We said, we're going to run the opposite way by intent of what we originally did with the restaurant. Originally, Alinea was very minimalist. It had, this is the blueprint, but had that, what had become an iconic hallway, disorienting you as you entered the restaurant, dumped you out right in the middle of the building. We sacrificed a lot of square feet to accomplish that. You know, it gave you that perspective when you walked in. You thought you were going to a circus or a haunted house. So now, what is the opposite of that? Well, now instead of isolating people and bringing them tighter and tighter and then having this big release when they enter the middle of the space, let's get rid of that hallway. Let's shift it. Let's make it very interactive and lively when you walk into the space instead of cold and sterile. So now we have plans to invert it, turn it sideways, have, as you'll see in the blue square here, a different staircase. In the purple square, you'll see adding a kitchen table. So there's a collage of the old staircase. And it was a journey in itself. It had a long catwalk. The idea was kinetic motion. You know, how do we make people move through the space? We were always very concerned about that. In the new iteration, we go the opposite. Instead of right angles in a long journey, now we're on a curve. And you're able to walk through that space in plain view of the dining room. And the people are going through with you like that. Kitchen table experience, something that we've never done at Alinea that we're looking forward to being able to really play with. Again, minimalist in the core, the old Alinea. I like saying that, the old Alinea. Everything was a rectangle or a square. Everything was very hyper-focused. There wasn't a lot of ornate decor. So now, as you can see in this purple square, we're turning these square rooms into round and oval rooms. We're increasing the banquet seating, not in capacity, but in size. We have the ability to close off. If you look closely, every dining room now has doors on it, which allows us to create what ultimately will be 4 different environments. So now we'll be able to play with smell, play with sound, play with lighting in a very controlled environment. Whereas before, if you have 25 people in one room eating and they're all on different courses, how can we really play with light? How can we really play with smell? Because not everybody's on the same course. It doesn't make sense. So now with these rooms closed down and changing the way we seat the restaurant, we will be able to have live music come into a room and choreograph it with a certain course. We will be able to play with lighting. We will be able to pump the room full of a particular smell to complement the course that everybody's on. So these are kind of the directions that we're going in with the new Alinea. While we're doing that, we have over 70 people on the staff at Alinea, mixed front, back, and administrative. So when you think about a 70-person operation, it's a tremendous amount of labor that we have to be responsible for to pay out every week, every 2 weeks. So in order for us to shut it down for 3 months and renovate, we can't just lay those 70 people off. We have to find a way to have a positive revenue stream so that we can pay them. And one of the exciting things that's becoming more and more popular is a pop-up. So we decided that we were going to do a series of pop-ups so that we had an incoming revenue stream so that we could pay the team to continue working while the Alinea was being renovated. So we decided on Madrid and Miami. So in January, we will fly the entire team to Madrid and run Alinea there for 4 weeks. We come back home after a week in between and go directly to Miami, same thing, in order to give a little bit of inspiration and travel and excitement to the team and give them a paycheck. So that's basically where we're at in a nutshell.
So, Grant, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I talked, your booking system is a brave decision. I talked about that with a couple of German chefs. Most of them said, hey, that's okay, that's good, that's necessary. But our guests wouldn't accept to buy a ticket in advance. What are your experiences with that system?
When we open next, we created a ticketing site for reservations called TAC. And it became very clear very quickly that the transparency, the variable-based pricing that you were able to afford the guests, basically depending on when you come to the restaurant, if you come on a later hour on a day of the week. So Wednesday at 9 o'clock costs 50% less than Saturday at 7 for the exact same experience. The restaurant ran incredibly profitably. We had no no-shows because people had already paid for the table. So from an operational point of view, it was a game changer. We moved it to Alinea. We moved it to the aviary. We expanded the company. We have roughly 50 restaurants on the platform right now. Per se, French Laundry, Clove Club in London. Hopefully we'll get some in Germany. But yeah, about 50 on the system right now, and it's just growing. We add 5 or 6 a week. It's amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Gibt es noch Fragen aus dem Publikum an Grant? Well, you don't come to Cologne.
Right.
You want to make a practicum.
No.
What he has to do?
Oh, to come and work?
Yeah.
A visa. We struggle with the visas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Jürgen, du weißt schon alles. Du hast ein Interview schon geführt. Ne? Mhm. Okay, dann vielen herzlichen Dank für die Show. Ich habe a little present for you.
Oh.
This is
Awesome.
this is a CHEF-SACHE knife, the 2000.
The one that was back there. Yeah.
It's a 2000.
Beautiful. Thank you.